Welcome back. I hope we all had a good night's sleep and that we were able to get some writing done this morning so we can hit the ground running today talking about our second pillar of story, and that is the world around your characters. That world building and not only making the map layout look interesting, which is what we're talking about right now, but the culture and the architecture and the flavors of the world around your character, which Ley will be addressing later today. I feel like Patrick Rothfuss gave us a very good idea of why it's important when he said also world building touches all aspects of your story. It touches the plot and the character as well. If you don't know the culture your character comes from, how can you know what he's really like? So even if you have a good idea of the lie that your character believes about themselves, the world is also integral. So know where you are on the map. Where your character is in the scene, where things are happening is a great way to start building that world. This will help you not be on a blank stage. I have been called out more than once in this regard because I like the characters doing things, I like them having this interesting plot, this interesting struggle, and I forget to put them in an interesting place. This helps integrate your reader to the scene and helps them keep track of your plot as well. These scene changes are defined by a change in either time or location. So this will help you and your readers keep track of the events as they're going. The hero's journey is defined by taking a journey from here to there. That is part of the story structure. So any movement in location helps feel like progress. If you've watched the Lord of the Rings movies recently, all of the characters are always moving left to right on the screen. So it feels like they're always making progress. That was an intentional design by the storytellers to make it feel like they're moving, that they're continuing their story. Also, knowing your world helps the world feel bigger than it is. So, yes, we understand this city's culture, this city and what they're doing. That makes it feel massive if you know where in the rest of the world they are. So first you want to talk about the types of terrain. This is the very background of your scene setting. But this is an important way of thinking about how to build your map. First, understand each different type of terrain and its advantages and disadvantages. So if you have a forest type terrain, which is one of my favorites to ride in, I grew up in a forest at the base of a mountain. It's near and dear to my heart. It always feels comfortable and like home. But there can be a lot of life and a lot of monsters in the forest. So keeping that kind of thing in mind as you're writing your terrain will have its advantages and disadvantages for your character. A lot of your major types of terrain are going to be urban, so you've got a city here, you've got a desert over here, you've got a jungle over here, you've got an ocean over here. When you're building your bigger types of maps, knowing what these types of terrain are will help you fill in the blank spots. Microclimates are a little bit smaller within your larger terrains. These are things like your waterfalls and your cave systems that have a smaller spot but a very specific type of climate around them. Generally, these are vague areas on your maps that will then on your more detailed maps start to show up. Sometimes these are natural landmarks like those waterfalls and streams. These will add dynamics to those big vast places. So I've got a big forest here and then there are two streams that connect right here and it creates for an interesting travel location and an interesting fishing spot and whatever else. There's a natural landmark there. These can be canyons, another favorite of mine to write about. Waterfalls, beaches, especially if you have a partially aquatic or an urban environment. A golf course or a park within a city. a monster hideout, so this den that the dragon is living in. Caves, sometimes the rain shadow side of a mountain, so that it's vacant compared to the rest, or like a burn scar. Creeks and streams and swamps. Swamps are also great because that's where the witches hide out. And of course, paths and roads, things that the humans have put in this environment that helps them, that will change the dynamic of how they interact with nature. In your story, when you're writing these types of things, touch is going to be your most important. Your character walks into an area and they recognize it's warm in here. There's a higher humidity because we're next to the ocean. When you get closer to the ocean, you start to feel things change and things are different in the climate and the forests around you. If you're not going with touch, smell is great because your readers have a pre-designed idea of what this is. So if I mention it smells like there's rain on the asphalt, or there's fresh cut grass, or stale beer as they enter a tavern, you are hearing these things, your reader is reading these things, and they automatically have a fast image of what the scene around them is like. Also, attaching emotions to any of these locations is a great opportunity to sprinkle in a little bit of backstory. When they smell the fresh cut wood of a carpenter's shop, does it remind them of hanging out with dad or grandpa as they're working on a project? This can often be a great way to think about where the cornerstone memory happened. And some happier time. I remember going to the mall when I was a kid. The mall is going to be a location that your character can be at now that triggers that memory from then. Also, where they were raised. I mentioned earlier I was raised in a forest. I am a huge fan of forests because of that. So first we're going to start out really wide on your world map. So this is going to be the broadest that a lot of people really like to pay attention to, especially if you're building a series where you have one thing happening in one place or another. So to build that world map, one of the suggestions that I like is to peel an orange and then drop the orange pieces on the table in front of you. Each of those chunks of orange are continents. Some are big, some are small. They're kind of scattered all over the place. This is a great way to start out building your world map. Another way to do it is to take someplace small and make it really, really big. Zoom into a random collection of islands in the South Pacific somewhere. And then make it really, really big. You've got interesting, natural-looking collections of land. Climates tend to go by latitude. So after you've got the edges of the map of where the ocean is, where the land is, think about latitude, and it's mirrored around the equator. So around the equator, you've got all of your rainforests. You're not going to find a rainforest next to the poles. And then you've got next to those deserts. Tundra and is at the very top and very bottom. Your Mediterranean climate is somewhere in between. Then you've got your massive forests beyond that. So as you're creating your worlds, having a tundra right next to a rainforest can feel a little awkward because we don't see that on Earth. So keeping those things in mind as far as latitudes across your map can be helpful in making your climates feel natural, feel realistic. I would say on your world map, don't bother with your microclimates. You're going to do your major cities, maybe some nation boundaries, some territory lines, and ocean, maybe mountains. That's pretty much all you're labeling in your world map. This is one of the earliest examples in my own childhood of a world map that I liked, and I got to interact with, and I followed. This is from the Guild Wars Legacy. So we've got the main story happens here its sequel happens here, and then its sequel after that happened here. Each of these had a very interesting and distinct culture, which is important in how your characters interact with the story. So I thought this was a fun and interesting example of a world map that you can reference and look at later. Next, we're zooming in a little bit. We're talking about your territory maps. If you have a smaller country, this would fall into that category, or perhaps if you're in the US, your state map. It's a broad area, but still a lot closer than the world map we looked at a moment ago. In your book, in your novel, you'll have one or maybe two of these. In the world map, unless you're doing a portal fantasy, you're basically only going to have one world map. If your character is traveling a fair amount, we'll see some of Rohan and some of Gondor. But we won't have 16,000 of these. This map that you're building for your territory map, this is what's going to encompass the majority of your story. So again, excessive travel stories can be the exception. We will see the territory map in our heads as far as where he is traveling on Mars, but we don't include the US government, Senate meetings, or NASA. That's not involved in that territory map. This is where you label your microclimates. So if you are marking the Grand Canyon or perhaps Mount Shasta, these locations that are a little more distinct and a little more specific to your areas, those are going to happen in your territory maps. Anything that shows up on the territory map is also not secreted. So your monster dens or your underground pathways, those things don't show up on your territory map. This is Ley's territory map and the types of places that she is interacting with in her work in progress. So she has a distinct place for her character, her home, the Yenchi village, this gorge here, that's going to be one of your microclimates, a mountain pass, and then capital city here. You've got all of this interesting stuff happening with your towns and cities, with your edges that we can see there's a much larger world beyond. Getting a little closer, your city map. This is going to be a portion of that. It's often going to be your capital city, because that's where the interesting drama tends to happen. Most of your cities are going to happen on a major coastline, especially where a river runs into the ocean. That tends to be where the majority of major cities are on Earth, because we grow up around water. They tend to be trade centers, that kind of thing. You'll likely have more than one city map. You'll have one of the location where they start out, maybe their homeland, a couple of cities that they hit on the way, and then your final one. In my work in progress, I only have one major city map, but it behaves more like a territory map because they have districts within the city. So this helps you understand how to navigate throughout your story, where your characters are going to and from. So understand where the walls of the city are, if there are walls at all, if it's completely unprotected, if there's an underground system like a sewage system that they can travel through. Some of your districts, if you're breaking up your city and you're building your city map, will include your political districts, like where the courts and the jails are, where the wealthy people live, where the middle class, the craftsman type people live. Generally a marketplace. So if you look at a city map of where I am currently located, we have several farmers markets plus a bunch of major shopping centers. And then of course the city's underbelly. There's slums, the dirty places that the wealthy people aren't going to go. This is Baldurs Gate. This is from the, I believe, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So this goes back a ways in the Dungeons and Dragons realm. So you've got major gates here, you've got your aquatic area here, and different ways to get from different portions to the city. You've got the upper city, the wealthy city, and such. Your outer city as you're moving into it. Your city maps you can kind of navigate. You know where all of the major landmarks are. You've got your Hall of Wonders, blah, blah, blah. This map is going to be more helpful in understanding how your characters are interacting with the world. Of course, having your building maps, these are the ones that are most interesting to me because I'm a fan of architecture and these kind of things. So sometimes this will be an outdoor region like a park, but for the most part it's going to be whatever building they're in currently. Have one, at least in your head, you don't have to sketch them all out, for every scene that exists in your world. These are going to also show up in your Dungeons and Dragons when we start getting into combat tonight, when we move from place to place to place. Knowing how your characters take steps in time comes down to your building map. Sometimes these buildings will be a couple of different stories, so they'll look like two separate disconnected maps that are actually connected to each other. When you're building houses, your public places, the dining room, the dance hall, sometimes the study, the kitchens, all of those are going to be on your lower levels. And then your private places where the bedrooms are and maybe a personal study, those are going to be farther away, just because of how your characters interact with the world around them. So your servants' navigation is technically on the lower level because they exist to serve the public and the guests as well. But they might have like secret passageways so they can come in and out without disturbing the public during a party. Understand how your water and your heating system works as well. So especially if you're doing more modern architecture, having the restrooms close to the kitchen, even if there's like a major wall in between, makes the plumbing just a lot easier to design. So it's something to keep in mind when you're building a building-wide map. Also, something to include in your map are windows and stairs and furniture. These will have an effect on how your characters navigate through your building map, not just the doors. So here's an example of a building map from a D&D game. So you can clearly see where they walk in and how they navigate throughout the house, and then the servants' quarters and the staff quarters go out this way. So when you're building a realistic and real-feeling world, you're going to have your humans interacting with nature. That's how the humans leave their mark and how they manage to exist. Architecture is a great cultural detail that you can have in your story that is a direct reflection of the world around them. So especially your slopes or your roofs, if you're in a desert type environment or somewhere more equatorial, they're going to be even. If you're in a place with a bunch of snow, they're going to be more sloped. The more slope they have, the more snow they likely get, because if you have a flat roof, snow's going to collapse it. So also understanding where their garages are or the stables, these kind of things, how you can navigate to and from your locations is integrated into your architecture. Travel is another important thing. We're going to talk a little more about that in a moment, but understand if the roads are paved, if they're cobblestoned, if it's asphalt, if it's just dirt, if it's a deer trail. And are cartographers even a thing in your world? If you're going deeper into the fantasy, you will have more people whose livelihood comes down to drawing maps, whereas modern day, the maps are already designed. Also understand in how they interact with nature. Basically, every climate, every microclimate has natural disasters. The area I'm in currently, the major natural disaster we face is wildfire. It might be tsunami where your characters are, or tornadoes. There are a lot of different options depending on that, but understanding what it's like for your characters will help you build a realistic world, because they have a plan for when the flood always comes every year, or whatever it is. How the characters travel is also important in understanding how your character is going to be traveling. Is there a road system? If it's a major city and people flock once a year to it for the census or whatever else, having these major cities is a great way to build a map that orients around a place and make it feel important. If there's only one road leading in and out of Kaer Morhen, then it's going to be a fairly obscure place. People aren't going to be coming and going unless they know the road already. Understand your modes of transportation. Yep, people are walking. Frodo is spending a lot of time walking. There are also eagles that bring him back. And then we even had horses that work with the elves sometimes and the humans sometimes. But your mode of transportation should be based on your wealth. And so you can often have the highway and the freeway, which are two different ways to get to the same place based on road maintenance and taxes. So if you're poor and you don't want to pay the fee to go on the easy road, you'll go on the free path. Your travel speeds, this information is pulled from a Dungeons and Dragons book, so you can go and look it up later. But you can, if you're really enthusiastic, walk or march up to 24 miles in a day. Horse is going to get you a lot further, easily 32 miles per day. Your flying mounts, so if you're on a griffin or a dragon, they will bring you up to 72 miles per day. They're going to be your fastest. Carriage I put down per hour because you're not really going to travel long distances by carriage. It's mostly navigating the city, so about 4 miles in the hour. Rowboat's going to get you 16 miles per day. That's mostly freshwater. And then your ship's going to get about twice that at 32 miles per day. Industry is another way that humans interact with your maps. So understand the natural resources of your town. If you read He Who Fights with Monsters, they have pillars that are scattered throughout the desert, throughout the world, where magic just gets funneled into the world. And that comes often in the form of monsters, and then the Adventurous Society kills the monsters and it becomes a currency. Is there mining wherever you are, especially if you have dwarves or if you're in a mountainous area? Mining, and what specifically are they mining? Because in this area there's gold. If you go that way 130 miles, you're going to end up with silver. Are they mostly based on water and fish? If you were participating with the D&D campaign last night, you know that's going to be a lot of the industry of the town that we were in and how they got started. Of course, if you're not coastal, or you're probably doing agriculture. You're still very dependent on water, so you're probably close to a river, but you have big, wide, open spaces instead of forests. So your plains are going to lend themselves to agriculture a lot easier. Of course, know how long your characters, not just your characters, but their lineage, have been in that location. The city I'm in currently was founded in 1888. If you go to Europe, that's a very young city. In this area, that's a pretty old city. So understanding what brought humans to the area and what started the city helps your city feel old or young, new or sort of a tourist trap, however this happens. So a gold rush is a great way to make it new, because all of a sudden you had a whole bunch of people come to a new place, as compared to if it's generational. So my great-great-great-great-grandfather's lineage had built this pub, and now I'm running the pub for generations to come. Non-physical industries are more in the bigger cities. So you're going to have your arts, especially your painters, aren't going to live in the middle of nowhere as much as they like to. They can't sell their stuff because people are more focused on the basics in the smaller towns. Service industries, similar, they're going to be for the more advanced cultures. And of course, being a trade center, that tends to be everyone bring their stuff and trade off on a cyclical basis, once a quarter or once a year, whatever it may be. Food, another great way for your character to experience the world around them. So integrating the ingredients of, oh, what am I eating? It's an omelet based off of this type of creature that doesn't exist on Earth. So you can talk a little bit more about the physical world around them because of food. Especially botany is a great way to do this because we eat more plants than we do animals. And it's very easy to talk about animals because you're interacting with them. It's harder to talk about plants because it's harder to interact with them in the rest of the world. Something to keep in mind is if your character is traveling, what kind of trail rations they have, how it's stored. Is it lembas bread where they can just take a nibble? Or is it more of the Native American style where they've got this brick of seeds and fats? These are different ways to preserve food that will help you make the world and their interaction with the world feel real. Also, food brings people together. I mentioned this yesterday. I'm a big fan of food. So it's a good thing for your characters to be doing if they're at a feast. George R.R. Martin was a huge fan of integrating important information into a feast. So your characters can be physically doing something while they're talking about something else. A lot of alliances are made or broken over feasts. That's why the D&D character I'm playing tonight has purify food and drink because she's an ambassador. Her job is to go to distant lands and make allegiances. So food is important to her lifestyle, and it's generally where a lot of your alliances are made or broken. It's also a symbol of celebration. So we're going to hold a big feast to celebrate the fact that we survived this ordeal as a city, as a country. Alcohol, also incredibly important, because this is how your characters let their inhibitions down. This is a great storytelling tool to reveal something about the deeper truths of the character, especially if they're very guarded. Understand how fermentation works wherever they are. What ingredients they're using, if they're using honey, if they're using grapes, if they're using barley. Is it used medicinally or recreationally or even religiously? These are all different ways that food can integrate into your culture and your character can directly interact with the world around them. The government, of course, is the height of how your humans are interacting with the world. They have their boundaries for their maps and the like. So a lot of government comes down to how people get into power. How does your leadership come and go? Is it a divine birthright? Is it more of a people getting elected, or is it might makes right? If it's a monarchy, it's often one of these things. Constitutional monarch, which is a president, someone put them into power after they were already an adult. Their divine right, that tends to fall more into the might makes right. God said, I'm supposed to be in charge. Everyone's like, well, I can't argue with God, so that guy's in charge. And then birthright. My dad was in charge, I'm in charge, my son's going to be in charge. If you're having multiple leaders, there are a couple of ways to do that. There's the republic. So you have a Senate, which is what you saw in Star Wars, and mostly what you saw in Rome, some in the US. Someone's going to go represent my clan, someone's going to go represent your clan, and then they're all going to get together and talk and come to peace while I'm still back at home. Theocracy, the people who are in charge of whatever the faith is, they're in charge of making the ultimate decisions. Because a lot of government and morality go hand in hand, theocracy was especially popular in the very beginnings of Earth. And then, of course, your oligarchy, you have a collection of people who are in charge of whatever. So the Senate committees are mini oligarchies. Drawing your map lines is also important. So I guess I'll start down here. Understanding how your borders are drawn in actual maps that you're looking at, they're either going to be more or less straight lines, or perhaps any wiggly lines follow water for the most part. Sometimes canyons, but physical features in the land will help decide where your map lines are drawn and where your battle lines are drawn. Understand if you have more of a nation state where you've got this chunk of land and then this is the capital. That's more what we have in California where we are. It's not that one place is more valuable than another. It's that we have this land and we need somewhere to be the capital, so it might as well be there. As compared to a kingdom, we've got the kingdom city where the king resides, and then the influence of the town sort of decays the farther away you get. And then you have some borders because that's what the kingdom is responsible for, and that's how you show that you're a good king, is by conquering more kingdoms. But for the most part, the influence of the governments and the politics decays the farther you get from the king. And know if there's a no man's land. If there's a huge mountain range that's impassable, nobody even wants to live there. That's going to be a source of a lot of interesting stuff for your characters to interact with. Know how conquering works when you have two governments going to war. If I conquer you, do you just become a state that's within my world? That's kind of how the Roman Empire worked. Do we make allegiances and unite? That's kind of how China happened, and because it was a whole bunch of little ones and they all got together and said, okay, we need to all have the same currency at least. And they were conquered by Qin, but anyway. How does the currency change when one place is conquered by another? And then how does separation work? If the Scots want to say, hey, I don't want to be part of England, I'm just going to go be over here and all you English folks can just buzz off. Are there laws to separate? We have those in the US. If we want to create a new state, there are laws that need and hurdles that need to be passed in order to do that legally and peacefully. Do they just stop paying taxes and then lose protection? That was the Scots' sort of concept of what they were hoping to go for. Does the mother country fight to keep them? So did England fight to keep the US? These are things that can happen if you're changing your political lines. Of course, understand your economy, because everything in the world and how they interact with each other is based on money. First one is a trade-based system. So if I am bringing you a goat, can you give me a chair? So you've spent time building this chair and you're a carpenter. I don't have that skill set. You need food because your chair is not going to be edible. Let's trade. And then one of the ones that I was talking with Lee about earlier is if you're trading a currency that you get naturally. I believe I can't remember the name of the movie, but Caraval did this as well, where you start off with a certain amount of time and you can trade it for things. So the poor people are doing everything fast, and because that's their equivalent of cheap. But the rich people do things slowly and they live forever because they're rich. The base 10 system, this is what you see in Dungeons and Dragons. This is what you see more or less in the world's currency. This is easy to remember, and that's 10 copper makes 1 silver, 10 silver makes 1 gold, 10 gold makes 1 platinum. Super easy, straightforward. This is most common and assumed in your fantasy realm just because people don't want to have to do the homework to put into it. And then, of course, you can do the J.K. Rowling method, which is who knows. So that's going to be your chaotic. You've got 29 nuts per sickle and 17 sickles per galleon. Sure, why not? Don't expect your characters to remember that. You can sort of integrate it in, and that's something for you to know. But unless your character is an economist or a banker of some regard, this is not interesting information for your reader to remember. And of course, we all know this map better than our own city. This is the GTA map because we spent a lot of time playing through it. So this is your ending meme for today.